Good morning, I'm Julian Reed and welcome to Today in Parliament.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Janae Noel Ferguson. Welcome to another broadcast. Today in Parliament focuses on present legislation and we also take a look back at past debates.
And we begin Today in Parliament with yesterday's referendum in which Bahamians rejected all 4 constitutional bills. At this time, all of the results are still not in, but late last night, the Parliamentary Commissioner, Sherlyn Hall, announced that Bahamians voted no on the 4 bills to amend the Constitution regarding gender equality and citizenship. This in spite of the bills being passed with an overwhelming majority in the House of Assembly on March 2nd this year, and subsequently unanimously by the Senate. The bills were aimed at leveling the playing field between men and women on issues of citizenship and ending discrimination based on sex.
That's right, Julian. Thousands of Bahamians casted votes from about 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. When the polls closed yesterday. It was definitely a long night for Parliamentary Registration Department officials and us here at ZNS, as the results took hours before being released to the public. Then 5 hours after the polls closed, Parliamentary Commissioner took the unprecedented move by announcing on live TV and radio that the referendum had been called. This despite the fact that of the 181,000 eligible voters, the results announced by 11 p.m. total less than 15,000 votes.
Well, the results that were announced included just 3 of 23 constituencies here in New Providence, where 80% of the population lives. That's 125,255 voters. The unofficial results announced before the call by the Parliamentary Commissioner at 11 p.m. from the Family Islands and Grand Bahama clearly showed that the no votes outnumbered the yes votes, sometimes by more than 2 to 1.
And in the lead up to yesterday's vote, much has been said about the bills, and one of the greatest fears among the masses was whether or not Bill number 4 would lead to same-sex marriage, or Bill number 2, whether that would lead to marriages of convenience. While officials of the various vote no groups were convinced of this, vote yes and other government officials refuted those claims at every opportunity, explaining that the bills were straightforward and there was no hidden agenda.
Well, we expect that Prime Minister Perry Christie will address the results of the referendum when Parliament resumes today. The leader of the official opposition, Dr. Hubert Minnis, is also expected to speak on the referendum results.
In fact, we understand members of the opposition are holding a press conference at this hour in the minority room of the House to address the referendum. While all of this is expected to take place before the budget debate begins today, Prime Minister Perry Christie delivered the budget some 2 weeks ago on May 25th. Now, we also saw the tabling of the long-awaited University of the Bahamas bill that will transform the College of the Bahamas to university status. Now, this year's budget, the Prime Minister said, demonstrated fiscal discipline, reduction of debt, and a plan to address the needs of hurting Bahamians.
The Centerville MP predicted that based on its current track, the government will reduce the deficit by a further $100 million by the end of the year. That means by 2017, the deficit will have been reduced by 80%. That's $439 million.
Now, he also announced that a number of new measures will work in tandem with existing cost-cutting exercises to ensure flexibility to implement government's plan and programs to bring relief to Bahamians.
And probably the most anticipated announcement within the budget communication was a breakthrough for the stalled Baha Ma Resort. A joint statement from China Exim Bank, China State Construction and Engineering Company, who, by the way, are still under contract to finish construction of the resort, and the government confirmed that after 2 days of negotiations, all parties agreed to complete the construction of Baha Ma. The nation's leader revealed the contents of that agreement in Parliament.
Well, speaking to the issue, the Prime Minister also addressed rumors concerning the new agreement, one of them being that the government had agreed to give citizenship to some 500 Chinese workers. Now, Julian, the nation's leader said, quote, that was an absolute lie.
Issued by the Export-Import Bank of China, China State Construction and Engineering Corporation. And as the person about to lay this on the table, Mr. Speaker, let it be known, Mr. Speaker, that when CSEC was hired, when China Export-Import Bank came in with the financing, the Progressive Liberal Party was in opposition. This was a matter superintended by the F&M government, Mr. Speaker. and the pre-LP government, Mr. Speaker, inherited it. And it is still there. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the statement. Thank you very much. This is the fact. Following, Mr. Speaker, following,
Members.
following 2 days of successful meetings between representatives of the government of the Bahamas, the Export-Import Bank of China, and China State Construction Engineering Corporation, we are pleased to confirm that EXIM and CSEC, the lender to Bahama, and the parent company of the resort's general contractor, respectively, have entered into a framework agreement which provides a pathway forward for the completion of the Bahama resort. The arrangement provides for a framework for putting in place the financing required for completion of the project and for CSEC's indirect subsidiary, CCA Bahamas, to remobilize and restart construction to finish the project as expeditiously as possible. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I would like to finish it, please.
Very well, Honorable
Okay.
Member.
Mr. Speaker, so to remobilize and restart construction to finish the project as expeditiously as possible.
Members,
Negotiations between CCA Bahamas and the receivers appointed by EXIM are underway to agree appropriate terms for construction to recommence and to prepare a construction agreement which will provide the scheduled timeline for completion of the project. It is expected that many contractors who have participated in the construction of the project will be re-engaged in this process. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
members,
Mr. Speaker, the requirements of the unsecured Bahamian creditors will also be considered during the remobilization. And Mr. Speaker, what I'm so happy about, I'm continuing with my statement, please. EXIM, CSEC, and CCA Bahamas will work closely with the Bahamian government with a view to seeing the Bahama Resort project through to 100% completion so that Bahama can achieve its true purpose, providing thousands of high quality jobs to the Bahamian people and an ongoing economic boon to the Bahamas. The Bahamian government is fully committed. The Bahamian government is fully committed to provide all necessary assistance and cooperation required for the early completion and opening of the project. Mr. Speaker, I'm laying this on the table with the statement that, Mr. Speaker,
members,
all that has happened to date, Mr. Speaker, this represents the sum total of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Right Honorable Member. Members, order that the statement do lie on the table. Right Honorable Member for Centerville.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Members.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Members. Right Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, it is It is always shocking, Mr. Speaker. It is always shocking when you see people who are elected to Parliament to represent the Bahamian people wishing and hoping that something would not happen. But it has happened. Shocking. Shocking. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I am satisfied. I am satisfied based on the statement. Mr. Speaker, I am satisfied based on the statement and the assurances given in Beijing that every effort is being made to enable an earliest possible remobilization and that adequate funding is in place to provide for the completion of the project and the satisfaction of the legitimate claims of Bahamian contractors and suppliers. I want to go further, Mr. Speaker. I want to go further. Mr. Speaker, I have personally been meeting with representatives of employees, and particularly casino employees. And Mr. Speaker, they will have every assurance, every single one of them who is willing to go back to work in that place, Mr. Speaker, will be supported by the government of the Bahamas to get that. And in the final analysis, Mr. Speaker, in the final analysis, Mr. Speaker, in the final analysis, in the final analysis,
Members.
I promise you more than I promise them.
Members.
The only possibility you had to be in this place is me. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move on.
Members.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move to revenue measures.
Members.
I would like to move.
Members.
You want to take Long Island seat? That ain't gonna happen. Be like a wanderer soul.
Mr. Speaker, young members of Parliament, young members of Parliament would not be aware, even some of the older ones. But let me perhaps clarify this for the Bahamian public and them. The governments of the Bahamas, both FNM and PLP, committed themselves to a favored nation status to Atlantis. Any advantage given to any development in the Bahamas must be given to Atlantis. So therefore, credit this government with sense. That this government will not unilaterally negotiate anything without taking into consideration what has to happen for Atlantis. It does not arise. And this government will not sell citizenship. Will not trade citizenship.
Disappointed. It's okay.
5,000 citizenships under your watch.
Well, the Centerville MP also revealed a revamped mortgage relief plan. This after the first attempt to bring relief to distressed homeowners failed, with less than 10 people being assisted.
Well, this time around, Mr. Christie revealed that arrangements have changed. Greg Moss had also presented a mortgage relief bill to the House, which the Prime Minister said he hopes to be in discussions with him to continue to work out that plan. Now, homeowners who qualify will also have to hold their end of the bargain going forward.
The financial crisis impacted both financial institutions and individuals in the Bahamas, and the commercial banks had to absorb losses to varying degrees due to higher than historical loan defaults. The Bank of the Bahamas, an important part of the country's financial infrastructure, and which has no parent company, no parent company balance sheet to help absorb those losses now requires recapitalization. This is to be achieved through a combination of a rights offering and convertible contingent bonds. The government has supported the bank through this period of restructuring and modernizing. And I am pleased to note, Mr. Speaker, that the bank is on schedule to return to profitability in the second quarter of 2018 by refocusing itself as a bank for the public service, and please hear me in this, as refocusing itself as a bank for the public service, which will include the provision of loans to public officers, as well as banking services to public institutions. The government of the Bahamas, as part of the effort to modernize the country's financial infrastructure, the government of the Bahamas, as a part of an effort to modernize this country's financial infrastructure, has also designed a comprehensive mortgage relief program in collaboration with the Clearing Banks Association, to assist borrowers negatively impacted by the financial crisis. The program will provide financial incentives that will allow banks to offer borrowers who have some ability to pay but have fallen behind the chance to get back on track. Subject to program eligibility criteria, banks will offer qualifying borrowers a minimum of 20 to 25% reduction in monthly payments. For their part, borrowers will be required to attend a financial counseling program that will be established and run by the government. According to initial estimates,
Take the bank out of political hands, Mr. Prime Minister.
Members.
Mr. Speaker, the public service is made up of people, presumably, of integrity. The Prime Minister isn't speaking about his ministers. He's speaking about the public service. And presumably, one can expect that the public service is made up of people in the fulfillment of their responsibility will act with integrity. According to initial estimates, upwards of 1,000 delinquent borrowers, which are persons who are 90 days or more in arrears as of May 1st, 2016, are anticipated to qualify initially for the mortgage relief program. That number could, of course, go much higher. The program has been designed to make it as attractive as possible for eligible borrowers to agree to participate. For example, through large reductions in monthly payments, the ability to immediately start paying lower amounts prior to loan modification, paperwork, etc.
Right Honourable Member yields. The Chair recognizes Member for Bain and Grandstown.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will require more time to complete his communication, so I move the following resolution. Resolved that the business of the House to continue beyond 1 p.m. on Wednesday, 25th May.
It is moved and seconded that the business of this House extend beyond 1 p.m. on Wednesday, the 25th of May, 2016. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The business of this House extends beyond 1 p.m. Right Honourable Member for Centerville.
Mr. Speaker.
Well, the government also plans to launch an aggressive apprenticeship program to arrest the growing unemployment crisis, especially among youth. In the budget communication, Prime Minister Perry Christie said the program will ensure young people are properly trained to ensure long-term employment.
Prime Minister Perry Christie also stressed that it will be quite different from the former administration's program where young people were simply placed on jobs. Mr. Christie explained that they will become certified in their area of training. He also noted that the Grand Bahama Shipyard will play a major role in this new program.
The Prime Minister added that many participants of the program will be hired immediately to work on major projects in the capital. And most importantly, he said government plans to reduce temporary and contracted workers.
Mr. Speaker, the government is also introducing a new apprenticeship. We are introducing a new apprenticeship and training program, Mr. Speaker, that targets the unemployed. And that will be managed jointly, Mr. Speaker, by the Office of the Prime Minister and the National Training Agency. Mr. Speaker, I want to announce this so nobody could say I didn't say it.
Members,
Mr. Speaker, the government, Mr. Speaker, is launching a new apprenticeship program coordinated by the Office of the Prime Minister and the National Training Agency. Under this new program, for which we have in this budget allocated $22 million, Mr. Speaker, persons will be paid to work and train in a very formal manner with certification on completion of the apprenticeship. Mr. Speaker, the certification has come from...
members,
Mr. Speaker, for want of clarity, the program differs from the jobs program introduced by the previous administration in that it is not strictly about job placement for the unemployed, but rather training to ensure that persons are able to attract and retain long-term employment. The program is being structured along the lines that between the government, Mr. Speaker, along the lines that I discussed previously. The government also intends, Mr. Speaker, to employ with immediate effect individuals from the apprenticeship program to work on the creation of 2 green spaces for public use in New Providence. One will be situated at Lake Kalani and the other at the National Heroes Park in an area just south of the Botanical Gardens. We have promised a National Heroes Park. I now affirm that it will be brought about. Young people with an aptitude and willingness to learn professional landscaping will be engaged to assist with the development of these green spaces and will be apprenticed to professional and skilled landscapers. Both of these projects will be coordinated and managed by the Parks and Beaches Authority, with Lake Kalani being done in concert with Bahamas National Trust and the Nature Conservancy. And Mr. Speaker, every time you fly and you leave and you see this body of water, people are encroaching upon it. What we want to do, Mr. Speaker, and I hope, hopefully by the grace of God, in my lifetime, I will be able to jog around the entire park and be able to go and have Mr. Speaker, I'm in my communication, but I think, Mr. Speaker, I'm in my communication, but Mr. Speaker, I heard the leader of the opposition was a much younger man, I suppose, say that I'll be in a wheelchair, but the last time we were in a walking together, he couldn't keep up.
Literally and figuratively.
But I mean, and these are the one. Well, I know you. I guess you respect your elder, but you shouldn't be blowing that hard, you know. So, Mr. Speaker, the government will also, within the fiscal year, seek. I think members on both sides would wish to hear me say this, Mr. Speaker. The government will also, within the fiscal year, seek to bring the number of temporary and contractual workers to an irreducible minimum. Speaker, this is a long sought after target for people.
Members,
Many of these workers, Mr. Speaker, joined the public service without the requisite qualifications. And through their own hard work and commitment, they are making a valuable contribution to the public service and to our country. They are deserving. They are deserving of being integrated into the public service machine. Let it be understood, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the Minister of Finance has just so declared with the full support of his cabinet.
Yes, sir.
Well, Julian, that was definitely some welcome news for temporary workers. But also looking at this year's budgetary period, cellular liberalization will also unfold. It was back in October 2015 when Cable Bahamas Limited emerged as the successful bidder in the two-phase selection process to liberalize the cellular mobile market here in the Bahamas.
Now, this process was initiated by the government in November 2014 with a request for proposals to operate a second cellular mobile network. The RFP stipulated that a new Bahamian company, NewCo, would be formed to hold the cellular licenses and that the successful applicant of the process would be a minority shareholder of NewCo. Another Bahamian company, Holding Co., would be formed as the entity that will hold the majority equity ownership interest in NewCo on behalf of the Bahamian public.
In line with CBL's Phase 1 commitments, Holding Co. will hold 51.75% of shares in NewCo, and CBL will hold the remaining 48.75%. Licensing of NewCo. In light of CBL having met the remaining requirements of the request for proposal, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to advise that the government has notified the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority, and if they haven't, they will, to proceed with the licensing of NewCo. Although CBL will have management and board control of NewCo, Holding Company will have certain standard market veto rights in order to protect its investment. The first board meeting of NewCo is expected to take place in the coming weeks. Mr. Speaker, the license will be awarded to NewCo for a 15-year period, and NewCo's trade name will be disclosed just prior to its launch date later this year. I speak to Holding Co. In order to facilitate the timely formation and licensing of NewCo, the government has incorporated Holding Co. with itself as the sole, with itself as the only shareholder initially. Holding Co. by the government and the initial shareholder. Government shareholding in Holding Co., however, is intended to be temporary in nature, and a caretaker board will be appointed until such time as Holding Co. shares have been divested. In the meantime, the focus of the task force and its advisor, PricewaterhouseCoopers, will shift to soliciting eligible investors. This process, however, will not interfere with the timing of NewCo's launch once the relevant licenses have been granted by IRCA. It is proposed that Holding Co. shares will be offered to institutional investors, for example, local pension, mutual funds, cooperative credit unions, within the next few months. Such an offering will ensure that the equity ownership in Holding Co. is as widely distributed as possible so that there will be broad Bahamian ownership. Cellular competition, Mr. Speaker, therefore, is now imminent. The licensing of NewCo within the next few weeks will mark yet another significant milestone of this government's commitment to introducing competition in the cellular mobile market. Under the licenses to be awarded by IRCA, and from the time that the licenses are awarded, NUCO will be required on a phased basis to satisfy the following coverage obligation. Within 3 months, 99% in New Providence and 80% in Grand Bahama. Within 6 months, 75% in each of the islands of Eleuthera, Abaco, Bimini, Andros, Exuma, including Black Point, Little Farmers Key, Staniel Key, and Stalking Island. Within 8 months, 85% of Andros and 99% in each of Grand Bahama, Eleuthera, Abaco, Bimini, and Exuma. Within 1 year, 12 months, 99% in each of Andros, Cat Island, Long Island, San Salvador, Berry Islands, Inagua, and Ragged Island must have been accomplished. Within 18 months, 99% in each of Acklands, Crooked Island, Long Key, Rum Key, and Megona. And Mr. Speaker, within 24 months, 80% of each of the remaining Exuma keys. Mr. Speaker, I wish to emphasize what the coverage obligation under the licenses will entail. A 99% coverage requirement, for example, means that NUCO will have to ensure that reliable service is available in 99% of the places where persons habitually live and travel. It should be noted that the NUCO's performance with respect to its license obligations will be secured by a performance bond to be submitted to IRCA within 14 days of the licenses being granted. Over and above the rollout obligations in the licenses, the government will also enter into a deed of undertaking with CBL to facilitate accelerated rollout if needed in the context of contemplated development on specific islands in the southern Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, the benefits expected from cellular liberalization will support the broader sustainable development goals of our country's National Development Plan.
Health insurance scheme also still a priority for the Christie administration, although the second phase of primary care has been delayed.
The Prime Minister, during the budget communication presented, said that significant strides were made in the evaluation and assessment of our public health sector.
With non-communicable diseases impacting just about every sector of Bahamian life, Mr. Christie said the budget allocation for the Ministry of Health reflects an investment in primary care coverage and health system strengthening that will improve the quality of life for all.
Well, let's hope that the draft legislation for national health insurance will be complete with its consultation and in the hands of Cabinet to head to Parliament before the summer recess.
Well, that document released in February raised concerns for industry stakeholders who felt that it awarded expansive powers to the minister with responsibility for NHI and amends the Data Protection Act to expand the use of personal information. Now, the Prime Minister reaffirmed his commitment to deliver a comprehensive NHI plan.
Mr. Speaker, the implementation of national health insurance is reflected in our continual assessment and evaluation of medical professionals, healthcare facilities, allocation of resources, effective delivery of services. All of these elements are of vital importance to the core of health system strengthening and an essential aspect of the successful implementation of NHI Bahamas. We have made significant investments in the evaluation and assessment of our public health sector. We have evaluated our public health facilities. We have taken into account the need for additional doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. We have analyzed the distribution of financial and material resources and determined the deficit in terms of availability, accessibility, and the quality of services in our public sector. Mr. Speaker, strategic health system strengthening plans have been developed and are being implemented to bridge the gaps in all areas to support the implementation of national health insurance for the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, it is also unacceptable that today 70% of Bahamians still do not have health insurance. Not being able to afford health care can result in illnesses that are preventable, that can be avoided through access to primary care, which will be the first phase of coverage. It is also unacceptable that 32% of Bahamians who needed medical treatment at some point did not seek it because of cost. And I will never forget, Mr. Speaker, a young lady outside of the Kendall GI6 gym who I met and who was being attended to, young high school student. And I asked her what was wrong. And she said she felt faint, and she feels that way from time to time. And she was being attended to, and I asked her if she'd go to the hospital. She said her mommy told her she couldn't afford it. And this child couldn't afford it. This happens in our country. I then called the hospital and made an appointment, called her mother, and made an appointment to see her, for the doctors to see her. And the doctors volunteered to do so. And Mr. Speaker, 32% of Bahamians who needed medical treatment at some point did not seek it because they say they could not afford it. That is unacceptable in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It cannot be underscored enough that in a modern Bahamas, this is our opportunity to provide all Bahamians with the means and wherewithal to obtain routine medical services for themselves and for their families. The Ministry of Health, including the Department of Public Health and the Public Hospitals Authority, have introduced extended clinic hours and increased administrative capacity and availability of services in recent months. Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of this year, the National Health Insurance Secretariat has engaged in meaningful dialogue to educate Bahamians all over the Bahamas about NHI. This has included presentations to civic, corporate, religious, government, and non-government entities. The Secretariat consistently makes itself available to any and all organizations which request their presence for a presentation and discussion around NHI. They have traveled across the Bahamas, meeting local residents and speaking at town hall meetings in most islands. Before the end of this budget year, every island would have been engaged in discussions on the National Health Insurance Program. I am advised that these presentations are being well received and that the general public is calling for the implementation of NHI Bahamas without further delay. Additionally, over the last 12 months, the NHI Secretariat has consistently and assiduously collaborated with stakeholders to improve the manner in which we can collaborate regarding NHI Bahamas. Although public consultation regarding the NHI legislation has concluded, stakeholder engagements will continue in order to further develop the roadmap towards the phased implementation of NHI Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, these stakeholder groups have included the Bahamas Association of Physiotherapists, the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, the Bahamas Chiropractic Association, the Bahamas Dental Association, the Bahamas Doctors Union, the Bahamas Insurance Association, the Bahamas Nurses Association, the Medical Association of the Bahamas, the Pharmacy Association of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, my cabinet has approved a single governance model that will accelerate the implementation of universal health coverage while providing effective oversight of the program. The approved integrated universal health coverage governance structure will allow for quick and effective decision-making with transparency and accountability, as well as the alignment of health systems, and will result in greater efficiency, continuity of care, and the seamless delivery of patient-centered services in the government health sector. The accepted integrated universal health coverage governance model that my government has adopted, following the recommendations of KPMG, is in keeping with our commitment to work with stakeholders to shape the design and implementation of universal health coverage and support the advancement of health system strengthening goals. Additionally, the Universal Health Care Stakeholder Advisory Committee is being formed to improve the health of Bahamians through ongoing stakeholder engagement and continuous collaboration. Mr. Speaker, the budget allocation for the Ministry of Health reflects an investment in primary care coverage and health system strengthening that will significantly improve the quality of life for Bahamians. This will reveal itself in shorter waiting times, improved facilities, more doctors, and Bahamians living longer and healthier lives in a modern Bahamas. But, Mr. Speaker, I added this to my communication this morning. I said this: in any event, when we are advised by Bahamian doctors that the Bahamas is worst off in the region, and some doctors say, worse off in the world with respect to the incidence of diabetes, a most debilitating and life-changing disease. When we are told that, where people have their limbs amputated, where people die, and we are the worst in the Caribbean, and we are allowing ourselves to be caught up in the debate whether or not, we must readily accept, Mr. Speaker, I wrote this, then we must readily accept that there is a compelling urgency to launch a national lifestyle improvement program for all Bahamians with special emphasis on our school population. And we are going to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Well, this year's budget was also filled with a number of tax reductions and eliminations. The Prime Minister acknowledged the need to provide additional relief to consumers and businesses through customs duties, while increasing compliance and efficiency in customs operations and enhancing administration and compliance in respect of our major taxes. He unveiled a plan to also tackle fraud at the Customs Department.
Measures we are proposing to extend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act for another year to June 30th, 2017. To extend the Family Island Development Encouragement Act for another year to June 30th, 2017. To provide customs duty exemptions, Mr. Speaker, to provide customs duties exemptions and real property tax concessions to owners of derelict buildings in New Providence who intend to demolish and or renovate these buildings for commercial, educational, or social purposes. Allow the real property tax concessions granted to residential properties last year to be extended to commercial properties, with the exception of properties which are now subject to collection. To allow for the waiver of real property tax arrears. To allow for the waiver of real property tax arrears for owner-occupied properties with values less than $250,000, which, Mr. Speaker, could potentially benefit over 41,000 homeowners. Wow. To expand, Mr. Speaker, to expand the tariff concessions available to light manufacturing by allowing items not on the approved list to be granted full duty exemption on approval of the minister. To allow churches to import their air conditions duty free. And to the Father of the Anglican Church who asked me whether he could get the bus that they want to buy to transport people up and down duty-free. The answer is yes. Just apply for it. To reduce or eliminate the duty on a number of household and grocery items, including appliances and parts, prepared turkey, ham, beef and chicken, meat, macaroni, spaghetti with meat and the like, ice cream, biscuits, waffles, cakes, and pastries, among others, just to give people the benefit of being able to get these things to eliminate the duty on baby clothes and reduce the duty on used clothing. No, I mean, as we introduce VAT, we are going to have a corresponding effort to reduce these. To eliminate the duty on costume, jewelry, perfumes, and certain leather goods, Mr. Speaker. To reduce the duty on computer peripherals, routers, and related items. To replace all remaining rates of duty of 7% with 5% rate, all in good time. To reduce or eliminate the duty on various building materials, such as plywood, sheetrock, cement, roofing, tiles and shingles, electrical wiring, marble and granite, and other stones, among others. To reduce, yes, this is good stuff, all good stuff. To reduce the environmental levy on used tires, to reflect the low value cost of such imports. To exempt, excuse me now please, to exempt from VAT ancillary fees paid along with tuition fees. And in furtherance of that, and furtherance of one of their colleagues who came to us, with a request for help, we will develop a framework to allow the Minister of Finance to take steps through the Tariff Act to protect Bahamian agricultural and manufactured products. Mr. Speaker, we are proposing measures, Mr. Speaker, to enhance compliance and reduce the potential for fraud at customs, which will have minimal impact on businesses that are fully compliant. Specifically, we are proposing to increase the customs storage charges for vehicles. We are proposing to implement a licensing regime for cargo couriers, to institute a fee to amend cargo manifests, to institute a fee for the parcel list used by cargo ships, to allow for a processing fee to be levied on the shipper if prohibited or restricted goods are found on board that vessel, charge a higher processing fee for the late submission of manifests and the loading list, and make electronic submission of custom entries mandatory as of July 1st, 2016. So, Mr. Speaker, in this process, Mr. Speaker, to have an understanding that every effort would have been made to consult those who could possibly be impacted with a view to their having that understanding that you got to do what you got to do. Administration and compliance for major taxes. It is Mr. Speaker, we are introducing measures to improve the administration of and compliance with our major taxes, namely, we are proposing to adjust the requirement of the tax compliance certificate to cover major shareholders with over 20% of the shares as well as companies with similar shareholders, to increase the enforcement provisions under the Excise Stamp Tobacco Control Act to allow for the compounding of penalties and for customs officers to better monitor tobacco manufacturing.
Well, at this point, we will quickly move you to live proceedings of the House of Assembly. House Speaker Dr. Kendall Major, followed by his staff. Quickly moving into the House, take you now to live proceedings of the House of Assembly. Pastor Hugh Roach, the chaplain of the House, will now give the morning devotion, and you can join us back here at 1 p.m. for a final wrap-up and live
108
interviews.
years ago, my father was born. Still my hero. Just a little blacksmith, but we've had so many heroes since then, for which we're grateful. When you celebrated Labor Day, I knew Sir Randall personally. And we have our heroes. And we have those of you today who represent the people. What a privilege. What a privilege. After this, I guess, we'll have Independence Day, and then we'll have August Monday, and Emancipation, and Heroes Day. The year's moving fast. Look ahead. Look ahead. The year is moving fast. Our text today comes from the prophet Samuel, found in the book of Samuel, the 8th chapter. Now it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Hearken or heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. God honors the voice and the vote of his people. Let us pray. O God, our Heavenly Father, we hallow your name in this honorable house this morning because you are still sovereign of the world. We give you thanks for all those who represent your people in this chamber. We ask your blessing on today's agenda, and we humbly beseech thee to remember your servants whom you've allowed to be in the positions they now hold. We thank you for our Prime Minister and his deputy, our leader of the opposition, and the other leaders in opposition. We thank you for the clerks and servants of this house. But we ask a special blessing upon the Honorable Speaker as he deals with today's agenda. Bless our Commonwealth, O Lord, in all its activities. And as the quiet revolution continues, may we be disposed to hear the voice of God. We pray your blessing now, not only upon us who are here, but those who look to this place for guidance and leadership and direction. Bless the students who are finishing their exams and getting ready for graduation and soon will be on the job market. We pray that provisions will be made to accommodate them. Remember the other leaders of the nations of the world, O Lord. We know that you are the God the God of us all, and we pray that you will make us a sensitive and consecrated people who will always hear your voice and pray for strength to do your will, since we humbly pray in the name of our blessed Savior, the fairest Lord Jesus, who taught us when we pray to say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Amen. God bless you.
Good morning, honorable members. Today is Wednesday, the 8th of June, in the year of our Lord 2016, and I'd like to welcome you back for a new sitting of this honorable house. When we ended our sitting today, it is our intention to debate by way of second reading and committal the budget debate used by a compendium of bills led by the Appropriations Revenue Account Expenses 2016-2017 bill. And that would include a compendium of many bills and a resolution. Today we will follow the usual agenda, and we will begin as indicated by our agenda. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador. Laying of documents.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Electricity Act 2015, appointed day, transfer of functions notice 2016.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the documents be brought up. In order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Airport Authority Amendment Act 2014, appointed day notice 2016.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the public holidays Whit Monday 2016, opening of shops notice 2016, the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act 2016, appointed day notice 2016, and the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation audited financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2013, an independent auditor's report.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers? There are none. Statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the right honorable member for Centerville. Statements and communications by ministers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I should like to commend the people of the Bahamas for their participation in yesterday's historic vote on gender equality. Yesterday's referendum was fair, transparent, and open. And insofar as we are aware, the result was certainly very clear. The voice of the people has sounded in the land. It needs to be respected and honored, and it will be. Mr. Speaker, it would be useful, particularly for the purposes of members of Parliament and the general public at large, for me to briefly recall how we arrived at the referendum, because each important step of the way was founded on a bipartisan consensus. When the government decided to appoint the Constitutional Commission, we advised the leader of the opposition that we wanted to appoint a nonpartisan commission to be chaired by Mr. Sean McQueenie QC, and invited him to appoint a representative from the opposition. He recommended the Honorable Carl Bethel, a former Attorney General, who agreed to serve. When the Honorable Carl Bethel was appointed to the Senate, he was replaced by the Honorable Teresa Moxie Ingle. The commission commenced consultations throughout the country, including with all political parties, civil society, church leaders, including the President of the Christian Council. Many consultations with church leaders took place in the office of the Prime Minister with the leader of the opposition present. In those meetings, the Commission discussed the bills to be presented in Parliament. The church leaders present were told by me in the presence of the leader of the opposition that they should see the presence of Dr. Minnis with me at the table in the office of the Prime Minister as indicative of a bipartisan and united approach to these matters of national importance. This bipartisanship and unity were obviously, and stated by me often, in the presence of all of the church leaders, some of whom are persons who led the no vote. But this bipartisanship and unity were of critical importance. Ultimately, they were also aware, that is church leaders, that the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister issued statements in Parliament in full support of the process, and that when the bills came to Parliament, we would support them. The bills were passed in both houses of Parliament by the constitutionally required special majority. In setting up the government, in setting this up, and in setting up a yes campaign, the government did it on the basis that it would also be a politically united effort. Special effort was made to indicate bipartisanship at all times. Lady Sharon Wilson and Mrs. Lynn Holowesco agreed to be co-chairs. They were supported by Attorney Cheryl Bazard and Mrs. Heather Hunt. Attorney Constance MacDonald and Mrs. Geneva Rutherford were appointed in Grand Bahama. Similar joint PLP-FNM appointments were made in the islands of Abaco, Eleuthera, and Exuma. Mr. Speaker, I present this brief history for the purpose of acknowledging the magnificent contribution of all these personalities so mentioned and the depth of our democracy. As Prime Minister, I would wish to thank the Constitutional Commission, and note in particular the exemplary leadership of its chairman, Sean McCraney QC. The members of the Commission met, Mr. Speaker, for over a year, consulting widely with civil society before submitting a report that provides a roadmap for constitutional reform for many years to come. The Public Education Committee of the Commission, retired Justice Ruby Nottish, the Honorable Teresa Moxley Ingram, and Ms. Brandis Dunkerson, traveled the Bahamas from one end to the next for a period of over 2 years. They left no island unvisited and no question unanswered in their efforts to educate and to elucidate. They really do deserve our collective thanks and praise for a job superbly done. It is for me also to extend thanks to all those who fought the good fight, in particular, co-chairs of the Yes campaign, including Lady Sharon Wilson, Lynn Holowesco, Heather Hunt, Cheryl Bazard. In Grand Bahama, as I've said, Geneva Rutherford and Consul MacDonald. In Abaco, FNM PLP co-chairs, Winsome Ferguson and Kendi Anderson McPhee. In Eleuthera, Audrey Scavala and former FNM Senator Laurie Roll. Exuma, Sophia Hart, Roll and Kenneth Nixon. Cat Island, Melanie Ramming and Ramona Taylor. Cat Island, Melanie Ramming and Mrs. Nixon. And in San Salvador, Velda Knowles and Beverly Laramore. Mr. Speaker, these leaders, representing a cross-section of the political spectrum, all believed that they were working for a righteous cause. I'm particularly appreciative of the courageous role that Lynn Holowesco, Heather Hunt, and Geneva Rutherford played in this noble effort. Although deeply committed FNMs, they were able to set this partisan allegiance aside so that they could join with their PLP sisters in an effort to build a better and fairer Bahamas for all our sons and daughters. In the same vein, I would like to thank publicly and commend publicly the member for Long Island for the consistency of her commitment to the cause for gender equality. She stood her ground and fought the good fight. I also commend the female leaders on my side, including female members of cabinet who fought valiantly as well. I also want to thank our former governors general and founding fathers, Sir Arthur Folkes and Sir Obel Tenquest, for sharing their voices in support of the cause for male-female equality that lay at the heart of the referendum. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that all will join me, too, in extending my appreciation to all persons who played an honest and sincere part in the public discourse of the constitutional bills, including the media and the leaders of the religious community. They all deserve our thanks for their contribution to the vibrancy of our democracy. Mr. Speaker, I will never stop believing that our sons and daughters deserve equal rights in our Constitution and equal treatment under our laws. We believe that when the dust clears, there will be room for time and time for proper reflection. Although yesterday's rejection of the gender equality bills is clearly a setback for the program of constitutional reform, it is by no means an end to it. Instead, the program of constitutional reform must continue, Mr. Speaker. How and when and in what form it will continue will be the subject of further consultations with my cabinet, the Constitutional Commission, the opposition, and civil society. In the meantime, in the wake of the vigorous and fractious debate that we have just come through, we must now find ways to bridge our differences as we continue to struggle for a better and brighter future for all our people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Right Honorable Member. Ordered that the communication be brought up. Ordered that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers. Point of order. You'll have to explain, Honorable Member.
Clarify some of the things that the Right Honourable Member for Centerville has spoken into the record of the Hansard as to what happened in this House. Whether you see that as a point of order or whether there's going to be some response to what the Honourable Member said, I think it's imperative that insofar as one version of what has just transpired has been said in the House just now, and insofar as it amounts, frankly, to an insult to the Bahamian people and our Bahamian democracy, to phrase it in that way without giving proper credence to the voice of the people that was expressed in yesterday's referendum, I would want to respond to that again, whether it's in a point of order or whether it's somewhere else in the agenda.
I think it's more appropriate it's somewhere else in the agenda, Honorable Member, because it's certainly not a point of order
I'm obliged.
in this section.
Thank you, Mr.
You would have an opportunity, Honorable Member.
I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Statement and communication by ministers. None? Communication by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General, messages from the Senate, motion for leave of absence, leave to resign seat on new writs, presentation of petition, presentation of reports of committees, adoption of reports of committees, first reading of bills. First reading of bills, Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Securities Industry Act to enhance the enforcement powers of the Commission to conduct investigations and regulatory hearings and impose sanctions and for connected matters.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the bill be brought up. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Securities Industries Act to enhance the enforcement powers of the Commission to conduct investigations and regulatory hearings and impose sanctions and for connected matters. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Securities Industry Act to enhance the enforcement powers of the Commission to conduct investigations and regulatory hearings and impose sanctions and for connected matters.
For the first reading of bills? There are none. Second reading and committal of bills? The mover for the annual budget debate, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A member for Golden Isles, you're using the appropriations revenue bill as the lead bill?
Yes.
Very well.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move for second reading and committal of a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st July 2016 and ending 30th of June 2017. Mr. Speaker, I want to commence by recognizing and giving thanks to the wonderful people of the Golden Isles constituency on whose behalf I stand here today and whom I've had the honor to represent over the last 4 years during this current administration. Mr. Speaker, this will be the final full budget debate in this current term of government. And I would like to say, for the record, Mr. Speaker, that it has been a tremendous honor and privilege for me to have been able to take part in each of the substantive budget debates as well as the mid-year budget debates. I want to thank the Right Honourable Member for Centerville for reposing in me the confidence to play such a vital role in the preparation and presentations of these budgets. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Finance presented the government's budget communication for the fiscal year and for the 2016-2017 fiscal year. As the fifth and final such communication during our government's current mandate, this year's communication stands as a further critical milestone in the implementation of both our comprehensive transformative agenda for a modern Bahamas and the medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, whose success is vital to the ongoing viability and sustainability of that agenda. As I said, Mr. Speaker, it has been my singular privilege to be involved in such an intimate way in this process of reform. And again, I want to thank the Prime Minister, the staff of the Ministry of Finance, and indeed the staff, particularly the finance staff of all the government ministries, departments, and agencies. Mr. Speaker, we speak often of the government's fiscal consolidation plan because that plan is critical. It is not some abstract economic theory, but it is because the implementation of government policy and the ability of government to provide vital services to the people of this country depend on sound government finances. Mr. Speaker, the budget communication clearly signals that despite a persistently challenging global economic environment and the daunting extent of the economic, social, and fiscal challenges that we have set out to tackle, we have persevered in putting into action the broad-based reform plans that were featured in our Charter for Governance. I would like at this time, Mr. Speaker, to recap a few of the highlights of the budget communication. The Right Honourable Member for Centerville, in presenting the budget communication, informed the Bahamian public that the fiscal consolidation plan that we initiated remains on course, and that each year that we have been in office, we have seen a steady reduction in the fiscal deficit. By the end of 2016-2017, we would have reduced the annual deficit by the sum of $439 million. The Right Honourable Member, in recapping the global situation, indicated that the global growth remains sluggish, which has impacted the Bahamian economy, and our growth remains subdued. And by the measures that we use, it has been indicated that the economy in real terms contracted in 2015. The Minister of Finance provided an update on the first stage of the CLECO payments and updated the Bahamian public on the various components of the National Development Plan that we are in the process of implementing. Those components including human capital development, governance, the natural and built environment, and the economy. The Prime Minister also provided an update on national health insurance, reaffirming to the Bahamian public that we remain committed to the early implementation of national health insurance, and he also provided an update on the state of the consultations with the various stakeholders. The Minister of Finance indicated that the government remains committed to the BAMSI project as a means to secure our food source, and indicated that the BAMSI is in close collaboration with the College of the Bahamas, wherein the same qualifications used to enter the College of the Bahamas will be used to enter BAMSI, which, Mr. Speaker, gives an indication of the high standards which will be and are being applied to BAMSI. The Minister of Finance also assured the Bahamian public that we continue to move forward with the Public Financial Management Reform Program to enable us to better plan and track our expenditure. This program includes extensive upgrades in the government financial infrastructure. This reform, Mr. Speaker, by being able to track expenditure geographically, will be critical as we move forward into the next stages of the Hawksbill Creek arrangements. Moving to law enforcement and justice, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance updated the public on the progress of swift justice, indicating that since 2012, conviction rates have doubled from 31% in 2012 to 63% in 2015. There have also been advances in case management and the ease with which cases can move through the legal system, Mr. Speaker. We were reminded of the investments in manpower and womanpower for the RBDF, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and the Royal Bahamas Police Force, Mr. Speaker, including additional investments in closed-circuit television technology, the police and fire station that's being built in Freeport, Grand Bahama, and is nearing completion, the expansion to 200 hours of the amount of hours that reservists can work, up from 150 hours, Mr. Speaker, which will make available to our police force more manpower. The Sandy Bottom project, Mr. Speaker, the substantial investment in vessels and infrastructure upgrades to decentralize the Royal Bahamas Defense Force and improve the operational efficiency of that force. Prime Minister also outlined on the economic front, Mr. Speaker, the extensive and deep investment pipeline, which, as those projects come on stream, will contribute to the growth in our economy and the provision of jobs. Further, Minister of Finance highlighted the modernization that we are undertaking in tax administration to improve our ability to collect the taxes that are due to the government, Mr. Speaker, inclusive of modern facilities, investment in the latest IT to facilitate collections of real property tax, the VAT, and business license. The minister indicated that cellular liberalization moves ahead and that we should soon see competition in the cellular phone segment, Mr. Speaker. And finally, as part of the recapping, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance also outlined the intention of the government to continue and to expand on the apprenticeship and training for young people program, $22 million allocated in this budget, Mr. Speaker, that a template was put in place in Grand Bahama at the Grand Bahama shipyard, whereby young Bahamian recruits will be recruited and trained to replace 400 non-Bahamian workers, Mr. Speaker. It's a partnership between the Grand Bahama shipyard and the government of the Bahamas over a number of years, where we will see Bahamian recruits being trained to replace those foreign workers, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as has been the case throughout the years, immediately after the budget and right on cue, the opposition chimed in with its usual stereotypical response, as was to be expected, punctuated with their traditional rote and, dare I say, tired comments in respect to the key messages of the budget. In this last budget presentation, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to make this point. I believe that the public policy debate in this country would be far richer and more productive if members opposite at least attempted to come forth with thoughtful, constructive, and responsible contributions in this discussion. They do, however, excel at speaking simultaneously out of both sides of their mouths. On the one hand, they bemoan the fact that the budget did not contain, in their words, exciting measures to boost economic growth, while in the very same breath, Mr. Speaker, they lament the absence of measures to slash government expenditure, which would, of course, immediately depress the domestic economy. Contradiction, Mr. Speaker, is indeed the hallmark of the party across the aisle. Mr. Speaker, as I lead off this debate on the budget, I will focus my remarks on a certain number of the critical messages in the communication. I want to speak to the various dimensions of our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, and in particular, their relevance to the attainment of our primary economic and fiscal objectives. Mr. Speaker, the point I want to make here is We're talking finance, and we're talking budget, and we're talking fiscal plan and planning and numbers, etc. That is not an esoteric discussion that has no meaning to the ordinary man on the street, Mr. Speaker. As I said at the outset, these are important matters because depending on how we manage our affairs, we will be in a better position if we do so well. If we manage well, Mr. Speaker, we'll be in a better position to make sure that we allocate the scarce resources that we have to the priority areas of this administration, Mr. Speaker, which is and which remains at the heart of the philosophy of this government, Mr. Speaker, is lifting up the downtrodden and empowering those who are without power, Mr. Speaker. So I will speak to the various dimensions of our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan and their relevance to the attainment of our economic and fiscal objectives. I will speak about the results of our plan, Mr. Speaker, and the outlook going forward, because it's very important to look how far we have come, Mr. Speaker. I will speak to our approach to expenditure restraint. I will speak about what has been the result of our various reform exercises in terms of taxation and how the collection effort has gone, Mr. Speaker. And I will, at the conclusion, I will provide some further details on the mortgage relief program that the Right Honourable Member for Centerville announced in the budget, Mr. Speaker. But before I move to that, Mr. Speaker, I want to just take a few moments to speak about the presentation, Mr. Speaker, because we have sought to make the documentation that we provide to members more relevant, to provide more information to them. I see one commentator, Mr. Speaker, saying that we didn't provide some tables in the initial documents that we presented, and somehow that represented a lack of transparency, Mr. Speaker. What has happened is we would present one book that is the estimates, and we would present another book that was the speech from the budget communication, along with some tables at the back, Mr. Speaker. Over the last few years, as part of our move to modernize the way our finances are presented, what we have done over the last 2 years is seek to put all of the information in this one book. And so, Mr. Speaker, in this draft estimates of revenue and expenditure, Mr. Speaker, we have, at the beginning, we have the actual budget communication by the Minister for Finance. It's all printed in this book. Shortly thereafter, there's a fiscal summary, which is extremely useful, Mr. Speaker, because first it shows all of the revenue lines, where the major sources of revenue come from. For example, it summarizes import and export duties, excise taxes, value-added tax, and other taxes. And then it shows the major areas of expenditure. And so users, members, as well as the public, when looking at expenditure, can immediately now look at this book and see that, for example, out of the total expenditure that we anticipate out of $2.03 billion that we expect to spend this year, approximately $709 million of that goes for personal emoluments, another $46 million goes for allowances. So you're looking at over $750 million, Mr. Speaker, of the recurrent budget going for personal emoluments. And then there's other summaries that shows how much goes for interest, how much goes for other expenses. There's a further summary of the revenue, Mr. Speaker, so there's more information. So sometimes I'm just a bit taken aback when what we are trying to do is move forward, and we get these commentary coming from all quarters that because we're changing the presentation, somehow there's a ulterior motive. Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. And I'm thinking, I'm sure, I'm confident that all users of this document would be able to look at it and be happy that everything is included in one document, Mr. Speaker. The there's a section in this book called Technical Highlights, Mr. Speaker, which shows, it goes on to speak about the different components. It shows which ministries have a capital budget. It goes on to show which departments get a subvention from the government and how much. For example, the Straw Market Authority, Bahamas Air, Water and Sewage, National Art Gallery, Sports Authority, etc. And it speaks about budget reforms and some of the ongoing budget reforms. And it says how we are introducing program budgeting as a way to better manage and allocate the financial resources. And it goes on to say how we are doing in 10 pilot agencies, including the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Works and Urban Development, Ministry of National Security, and the Ministry of Finance, how we're implementing program budgeting. And for users of the document, I won't go through the whole thing, Mr. Speaker. It talks about what is the purpose of the ministry, what does the ministry do, what are the programs, what resources are available to do this, and how do we measure what the various ministries produces and what they achieve, who is responsible and accountable, Mr. Speaker. And it's a pilot project that we're doing to help us better manage our resources, Mr. Speaker. Also, in this book, traditionally, as you know, when we get to the committee stage of the budget, we go through what we call the head-to-head, where we look at significant changes in the budget, and mostly members opposite would seek explanation of significant changes in budget items from the government. What we have done is we have gone through and given an explanation in this book beforehand, Mr. Speaker, of the significant changes in the allocation. So members, as they are looking at the budget allocations, they can look at the notes and see if they notice some significant change, either increase or reduction. They can look at the explanatory notes and get an explanation even beforehand, Mr. Speaker. All of this, Mr. Speaker, in an effort to increase the usefulness of the budget documentation. Also in the book, Mr. Speaker, traditionally you would get a big book that was the estimates, you'd get another book that was the budget communication, and you would get the various amendments or new bills that are being presented. Separately, in this, Mr. Speaker, we have included all of the amendments to the various acts that we are proposing. It's all included in this one publication. Interestingly as well, Mr. Speaker, we have various concession regimes. We have the concessions for returning residents. We give concessions for medical supplies, concessions for the City of Nassau Revitalization Act, the Family Island Development Encouragement Act, taxis and liveries, concessions under the Hotel Encouragement Act, Mr. Speaker, and included in this book.
Members.
For example.
Member for Golden Isles, pause for a moment.
Yeah.
Mr. Tynes, members, just keep it down a bit. Very well. Member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, for example, you can peruse this book, and you can see that for the period July 14th to June 2015, there were 2,174 applications processed under the Hotels Encouragement Act with...
Member yields. Point of
the member is referring to a booklet that I understand we should have. Most of us on this side have not received that book. Now, I understand that they may have been dropped at the Leader of the Opposition's office on Monday past. Yesterday.
You're referring to this booklet?
Yeah, correct. So I just want to, as the member speaks, I just need him to understand that, as I understand it, it's been just delivered on Monday past, and we have not had it in our hands at this point. And so as he goes on, he should just bear that in mind as he seeks to chastise certainly the opposite side. And certainly, absolutely. And it should have been presented from the day we received the other correspondence. So, it's important that we clarify that.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Mr.
Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker.
Member for Golden Isles.
Mr. Speaker. I concede that this particular book that I'm not chastising them on this. I'm not. And if the member feels that they're being chastised, Mr. Speaker, I apologize. And I hope that apology is accepted in the spirit in which it's given. I'm not chastising, Mr. Speaker. I'll make this point. Yes, I understand an effort was made to deliver. This book was printed after we presented the communication. But let me say this, Mr. Speaker, because, it's par for the course. Yeah, at the time that the budget communication was presented, Mr. Speaker, members received the estimates, they received a copy of the budget speech, and they received all of the acts, everything. All I'm saying is, subsequent to that, we went and we put it all in one book. That's all I'm saying. And we added some additional features. So I'm not chastising. We don't need to debate this. I'm not chastising.
Very well.
Just pointing out this is something that was produced. Yes, we had a delay in producing it. We rushed some copies so that members could have it. We were supposed to do it Monday. Now, if they say yesterday, I apologize. But I'm not chastising. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't want it to go forward that members did not have all of the necessary information. The estimates, at the time when the Prime Minister sat, the estimates, the laws, and the communication were presented. This is just an enhancement. I'm not chastising. I'm just pointing out some enhancements that we want to make.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for East Grand Bahama.
Sorry, and I just want to make sure that the minister knows we're not complaining about the documents that we've gotten. We've worked with the documents that we have. However, I just want the public to be aware that if there is enhancements that may have enhanced our understanding of these numbers, then we ought to have been able to have benefit of that. And that's the point that I'm making, because he's obviously got information that we do not have.
Point taken.
And that's the unfairness in the situation. That's all I'm pointing out.
You are correct, Honourable Member. You are correct. Member for Golden Isles.
Mr. Speaker, very same information. I don't want it to go forward that somehow something was changed. Only thing I'm pointing to, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that all that disparate information, we've now taken it and put it in one book, and we've put some more features here, which is for information. Like when I speak about the amount of concessions, you normally wouldn't have ever gotten that. That's never disclosed. I'm talking about us disclosing new information. Giving you more information, more. Laying out where all the, everybody who gets this subvention, it's not trying to change anything, Mr. Speaker. It's just providing more information. In this book also, I think, and we did it last year, all of the staffing resources, all of the ministries, it shows how many people are employed by each ministry. And at the end, Mr. Speaker, there is a piece on agencies, some of the achievements of those agencies and ongoing initiatives, Mr. Speaker. Once again, Mr. Speaker, that is for the use of members and members of the public. It gives more information. The point I'm making is we're trying to make the use of the information easier, the way we present it. We're trying to break down, even when I spoke about the fact that, you can just open the book instead of going and adding up all of the different heads and trying to figure out how much goes for salaries. We have the number already done. We're trying to modernize our presentation, Mr. Speaker. And just to close on that point, this is not, we printed this book, Mr. Speaker, and I told my staff, I said, make sure we send, before you bring any here, make sure you take them down to the Leader of the Opposition office so that they can have it. Because like I said in my first speech, Mr. Speaker, you've done this so much that you can predict the reaction. But again, we move on. How are you going on with this?
The member for Kalani rises.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Not certain the purpose of the...
Mr. Speaker, this is a point of order.
Point of
I
order.
appreciate the member acknowledging that he would inform his staff to send such document to the Leader of Opposition office. But Mr. Speaker, as was pointed out, we had not received this the document. We knew nothing of the document. And in this era of technology, it's very easy to have sent us a WhatsApp or email communication informing us that such a document exists and that they were sending it to our office so that we can all review it before we come to engage ourselves in such a debate.
Very well, thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Golden Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I gotta go. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, and so that is, in terms of the presentation, as we move forward, hopefully we get to the point, Mr. Speaker, where one day we just send everybody the documentation electronically. But when we do that, I fully expect someone to say, I don't have anything in my hand to scorch up, so you're trying to hide something. But, Mr. Speaker, medium-term consolidation plan, as we have repeatedly asserted since it was announced well over 3 years ago, is balanced, measured, and targeted across the various components that it comprises. And so while those dimensions are the true hallmark of our plan, I want to go into each one of them. But before I do that, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak a bit about the fiscal measures that were included in the budget communication and in this budget. So we've outlined the highlights of the budget communication. We've seen how we're seeking to change the presentation of the actual document. But in this budget, Mr. Speaker, we are doing some things to continue along the line that we started when we implemented the VAT in reducing customs duties on approximately 74 items, including various food items. I've heard some reaction that, oh, you're reducing it on these things, whereas you should reduce it on these other food items. The fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that most food items are either zero or very near zero already. So when you're looking to reduce, most of them are already zero or close to it, or somewhere like 5%. And so we began, when we implemented the value-added tax, Mr. Speaker, as you would recall, we reduced customs duties on approximately 100 items. That was January 1st, 2015. That was at the introduction. We came back at the budget in July 2015, and we reduced duties on approximately another 40 items. And what we're doing at this time, Mr. Speaker, is that we are reducing duties on another 74 items. And that is so we had 100 when we first started. We did about 40 during the budget, and now at this budget we're making reductions in an additional 74 items, Mr. Speaker. And you'll recall that that is in keeping with our commitment when we introduced the VAT, was to do a consistent and gradual reduction in customs duties. And I want to repeat that, Mr. Speaker, because there's still some out there who are saying that, oh, the government has not reduced customs duties when they implemented VAT, Mr. Speaker. We did 100. The same time we implemented VAT, we came back and did another 40 plus, and we're here now reducing more customs duties in fulfilling our commitment to do so. Again, in this budget, we are extending the Family Island Development and Encouragement Act for 1 year, Mr. Speaker. And why is that important? It's important because during the period July 2014 to June 2015, 3,330 applications were processed under the Family Island Development Encouragement Act, Mr. Speaker, 3,330. And the amount of concessions granted was just over $10 million. So we see that Bahamians are taking advantage of that concession, Mr. Speaker, and we have extended it. We are also extending the City of Nassau Revitalization Act for 1 year. And what we have done, Mr. Speaker, and I did not see the publication, but I understand that there was some commentary about the government, because we are increasing the amount to store a vehicle by customs from $30 a week to $50 a week, that somehow we are raising taxes, Mr. Speaker. But I will speak to that and some of the other enforcement matters that we are dealing with here in terms of a fee for the parcel list, and if someone wants to change or have a late submission of a manifest, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, the increase in the storage fee from $30 per week to $50 per week. What Customs has advised us, Mr. Speaker, is that, for example, if one were to store a vehicle on a private lot, that would be $75 per day. Customs charges $30 per week. And what has happened is you have people who are car salesmen, who have car lots, Mr. Speaker, who find it economical to just leave the vehicles on the customs property, pay the $30 per week, and as they sell the car, they move it off. And, and that has happened. And so we decided that, okay, it's a small increase, but we want to discourage that practice. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to say, in the case where there is genuine difficulty and genuine hardship, for example, if there's difficulty clearing the vehicle for whatever reason, and that case is presented, we have people, those would be considered in cases of genuine hardship, Mr. Speaker. Customs has also, when we look at the various changes to the Customs Management Act and regulations, Mr. Speaker, the department has advised us that they need these penalties in place to act as a disincentive for people to make last-minute changes to manifest and such, because that facilitates smuggling of contraband, including of firearms, and it facilitates fraud, so they want to be able to discourage people from making last-minute changes to customs manifest, Mr. Speaker. July 1st, we want all customs entries to be done electronically, which, again, we've seen the benefit of it. Approximately 90% of them are done electronically now, and we've seen the benefits in terms of improved administration and better collection. And so we want to move to 100% submission of customs entries, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Mr. Speaker, we put in place an amendment to the Real Property Tax Act, whereby if individuals owned a residential property and they were in arrears, and if they paid in full, the government would waive the penalty. We are now extending that to owners of commercial properties. If you're in arrears and you have penalties and you want to come and pay the bill, the government will waive the penalty. We are also, Mr. Speaker, tightening up our administration of tobacco production. In years gone by, we had little, if any, production of tobacco, Mr. Speaker. We are advised that now there are at least 3 producers, and so we need to give our customs officials added powers to be on the premises to ensure that everything is done in accordance with the laws. We, Mr. Speaker, in consultation with the private sector, we're adjusting the date for the submission of VAT payments from 28 days to 21 days, and we're going to do that beginning January 1st, 2017. So as it stands now, our businesses have 28 days after the end of the month to pay their VAT. We're moving that up to 21 days. We don't think it'll be the feedback that we have gotten so far, Mr. Speaker, is that it should not present a challenge, but nonetheless, what we have done is we are giving a 6-month period for adjustment, and we're giving a 6-month notice period so businesses can make the necessary adjustments. Mr. Speaker, we are making some further adjustments to the Stamp Act to eliminate a lot of the small fees, the $10 and $3, etc., Mr. Speaker, and we'll be able to go through the whole list of those sometime later on in the debate. We are implementing a 90-day amnesty on the penalty of stamping of documents. So if for whatever reason documents are outstanding and they have not been stamped, individuals can come forward and apply under the amnesty, whereby they won't have to pay the penalty. Mr. Speaker. Another step that we are taking, Mr. Speaker, is that we discovered we had meetings with a local Bahamian producer and who was being disadvantaged with foreign competition. And so we are putting in place a framework to allow the Minister of Finance to take steps through the Tariff Act to protect Bahamian agriculture and manufactured products, Mr. Speaker, and I expect that the Minister of Agriculture will speak more to that when he makes his presentation. For individuals who have applied for a exemption for first-time home ownership, and for some reason either they ran out of time or they have missed the deadline, we're giving them an opportunity to come forward and take advantage. Another important measure that we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is that there are many cases where we have homes with low value. As it stands, the property tax threshold is $250,000. You have houses valued less than that, but they continue to accrue property tax bills and arrears. The records, unfortunately, were not kept up to date, and so you have many individuals across New Providence in particular, Mr. Speaker, who have properties valued less than $250,000. It should be exempt, but for many years these small amounts have continuously accrued. Now these properties are passing from one generation to the next, and the children and grandchildren who now come into ownership of these properties, they find that they are faced with these tremendous property tax bills. We're putting in place a regime, Mr. Speaker, where those persons can have exemption, Mr. Speaker. And finally, well, two more. We are amending the Real Property Tax Act, Mr. Speaker, and the Tariff Act to allow for the Ministry of Finance to have individuals apply who own dilapidated properties. If they want to renovate or demolish those properties, they can apply for real property tax or duty concessions to do so, Mr. Speaker. And we are exempting from VAT any ancillary fees paid along with tuition fees, Mr. Speaker. So what we are doing now is taking the VAT off of education. Those small fees that it was on, Mr. Speaker, now we're taking them off totally. And so, Mr. Speaker, we believe that because we have come so far in terms of our deficit reduction, in terms of our management, we are now able to, number one, continue the program that we promised of the reduction in customs duties, the continual review and reduction of the customs duties, and to make other easements, maybe that's not the word I want to use, Mr. Speaker, make it easier, ease up, remove some more of these fees and taxes, some of which are nuisance, Mr. Speaker. And so we said that this is what we would do when we were implementing the VAT. We felt that it would be a more secure source of revenue, and that it will enable us to go back and continue to review a tax system with a view to taking off some of them every year, Mr. Speaker, and we have done so, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, we come and we debate the budget, and we say that we have come a fairly long way. We inherited, when we came into office, we found a budget deficit of $540 million. We had to come back, I got plenty to say, we had to come back and 6 months later and borrow $100 million to pay some leftover bills, Mr. Speaker. We come here today and we can say that by the end of this fiscal year, we would have wiped off $439 million off of that deficit, Mr. Speaker. and all we can hear is, I didn't get the book. All we can hear is, I didn't get the book. You know? But we soldier on, Mr. Speaker, because we're working for the Bahamian people. We're working for the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. And our medium plan, we met that mess in place, Mr. Speaker, and we realized that we had to put in a plan that is gradual. And we've stuck to it, and it's working, Mr. Speaker, and the plan is balanced. You know, we said we would have 4 elements to it: a reduction in expenditure, improvement in revenue administration, new sources of revenue, and growth in the economy, Mr. Speaker. And so, an unbalanced plan based solely on one of these major components will be clearly inappropriate and likely counterproductive. What do we mean, Mr. Speaker? You come in and you find a budget in a mess. Mr. Speaker, $3 million, I think it was, of available short-term financing to run the government. Imagine that. $540 million deficit. Everything maxed out. You doubled your overdraft, Mr. Speaker. Everything maxed out. And so you're faced with some options. You can go and you can take a hatchet to the budget and you can say, okay, we're cutting. We're just going to cut. But if you do that, Mr. Speaker, what happens is that you slow down the economy. If you withdraw the government from the economy in a drastic way, you slow down the economy. You push the economy back into recession. Major shock. The Europeans tried it. They had to abandon it, Mr. Speaker. If you say, okay, we have a $540 million hole, we're going to just put on some taxes. Again, you have the same problem, Mr. Speaker. You're going to tax the economy back into a recession. So you couldn't do that. If you say, and you fool yourself, and you come in and say, okay, well, we're going to grow out of it. We're going to just, fix the number, and we're going to grow. And then everybody will laugh you out of the room, including the international rating agency. Everybody say, you're crazy. The world is growing at 3%, and you're saying you're going to grow at 5%? How? All right? You can't just say, okay, well, we're going to tighten up and do a better job of administration. I hear people say, okay, go out and collect that $500 million in real property tax, Mr. Speaker. Well, it ain't going to happen. Because, number one, what has happened is when you have, and we can show, and I've spoken to it before, Mr. Speaker, how during the crisis, you know, how the arrears just exploded, and mostly with properties valued over $1 million. But, you know, you have to make a decision as a government, okay, this individual, this business owes this property tax. They employ some people. Maybe they made the calculation, I'll keep open, I'll keep my people employed, and I'll try and just manage the tax. Do you now go in and say, okay, I'm going to shut you down and go into your bank account and take it out? Or do you try to do a system where you say, okay, here's a concession, here's where you can have some relief, keep some people employed, keep the economy going? I say all this to say, Mr. Speaker, that in this environment that we live in now, you have people who are going to go to the Bahamian people with some strange solutions. They're going to say to the Bahamian people, the government should pay off your debt. They're going to go to the Bahamian people and say, okay, we're going to abolish VAT. They're going to go to the Bahamian people and say, okay, we're going to, as soon as we show up, we're going to cause the economy to start growing. All right? I say all that to say, Mr. Speaker, that this is reality that we're dealing with. We still live in a very, very uncertain economic environment. And so what we decided to do, we said, yes, we will try to hold our expenditure under control. We're not going to drastically cut, Mr. Speaker, but we're going to keep it under control. We're going to reform our tax system. We're not going to go and raise taxes like crazy because we realize it could push us into recession. We're going to reform our tax system. And then, Mr. Speaker, we'll do a bit, we'll do a better job of administration And that's why we've invested, continued the investment. It was started under the previous administration in the customs modernization. We've gone further. As we did the VAT reform, Mr. Speaker, we made it all electronic. We've seen increases in our business license compliance, our real property tax compliance. Small increases, I can speak about them later, Mr. Speaker. But the idea is, Mr. Speaker, that I hear some people speak about, okay, you have this VAT money, you shouldn't need to borrow anything. It doesn't happen in 1 year. And I'll speak to the progression and where we're going, Mr. Speaker, and you'll see the significant progress that we're making. But the point I wanted to make, Mr. Speaker, is that when we speak of a balanced plan with various components, it's not that you're not bold or that you're not innovative or you're not forceful enough, Mr. Speaker, but it's because there are realities that you can't escape. And so you have to do any adjustment gradually, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that, and if I can just, I'll stick to this, but Mr. Speaker, it was to be able to reform our revenue system and implement the VAT was a tremendously courageous thing, if I say so myself, Mr. Speaker. It's always politically expedient to delay it, Mr. Speaker. We delayed for years, for 20 years. I remember going into the Ministry of Finance in 2002 and meeting a report. They're talking about how inadequate our revenue system was, and I'm sure there are reports there before that. But we didn't do it. The next administration come, they didn't do it. Admittedly, they were in the midst of a crisis, so global crisis, so they made their calculation as to what they wanted to do. But it isn't politically expedient to do those types of reforms, Mr. Speaker, but what we recognize is that if we did not reform, if we tried to delay, then when you actually got to the time when you could delay no more, then you would have found the adjustment to be very, very painful, Mr. Speaker. And we, as best we can, sought to make the adjustment as smooth as possible, Mr. Speaker. And so, I want to point to the fact, because it might come up in this debate, that members might look and say, okay, you're controlling spending, but it's still going up, Mr. Speaker. But spending will go up, Mr. Speaker, inflation, more demands on the government. Prime Minister spoke about the Sandy Bottom and investment in the machinery and the personnel for the Defense Force, so that entails additional expenditure, Mr. Speaker, by very cost of living, and we will have increases. But what we have sought to do, Mr. Speaker, is to restrain the growth of public expenditure relative to the size of the economy, Mr. Speaker. And so you look at the size of the economy and you want to have a certain level of spending. And our approach in this area is comprehensive and balanced, with measures to enhance the administration of existing taxes and with the introduction of the VAT, as well as the expenditure controls, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance spoke in his budget communication about the apprenticeship program. There's the first phase of the program, a partnership between the Grand Bahama Shipyard, a joint funding agreement with the Grand Bahama Shipyard and the government of the Bahamas. And that was the first initiative to be developed under the apprenticeship program, Mr. Speaker. And we believe that by focusing on strengthening of human capital, this will be an initiative that will bolster the growth potential of our economy, because we're increasing the skill level, hence the potential productivity of those individuals, Mr. Speaker. As was stressed in the budget communication, Mr. Speaker, the business environment, when we're talking about growing the economy, the business environment is very, very critical. As we know, each year the World Bank publishes an Ease of Doing Business report, which is an assessment of the health of national economies based on an in-depth analysis of the fundamental factors of competitiveness and growth. And they look at things such as the nature and operation of the regulatory system, the efficiency of the public service, and the nature of business governance. And the report puts a score on ease of doing business, and it's a closely watched report, Mr. Speaker. And as we know, in 2016, the Bahamas ranks 106 out of 189 countries, 106 out of 189 countries that are covered in the report. Slight improvement from the 108th place of the previous year, but still, Mr. Speaker, when we look at Jamaica in 64th, St. Lucia in 77th, we must do better, Mr. Speaker. And the report looked at several areas, including things like getting electricity, starting a business, access to credit, registering property, etc., Mr. Speaker. And it is important, Mr. Speaker, to note that when we look at these rankings, for example, in ranking electricity, we rank 114th, starting a business 118th, access to credit 123rd, as you go into the bank, and registering property 183 out of 189, Mr. Speaker. But the good thing is, if we look at a silver lining, is that we are doing several reforms this year that we believe will enhance our ranking next year. And so these reports look at the situation that existed last year. They do not reflect the reforms and improvements that we have been making in a number of areas, including tax administration. The Prime Minister, in his budget communication, briefly outlined some of these, including the implementation by the Registrar General of online registration of companies, which we think will have a significant impact, because when you look at the body of the report, Mr. Speaker, you see registration of companies and the length of time that it used to take, having a significant negative impact on that particular ranking, starting a business. Customs modernization has also made tremendous strides in improving client service and facilitating trade with the implementation of electronic processing for all entries and online payments, as well as the forthcoming introduction of the electronic single window, which will offer a one-stop service to importers. The Department of Inland Revenue has introduced major improvements in the administration of its operations, including in the areas of real property tax and business license administration. These, Mr. Speaker, and many other reform initiatives are integral components of the government's comprehensive transformative agenda for a modern Bahamas. And, Mr. Speaker, it's a tremendous improvement when, for example, an individual can sit at home, apply for a business license, get the approval, print off their business license without ever having to go down to the business license department, Mr. Speaker. And so we believe that these sorts of reforms contribute significantly to improving productivity and competitiveness in our country, and it paves the way for economic growth, Mr. Speaker, and we believe that they will be reflected in forthcoming ease of doing business reports. I must say, though, Mr. Speaker, that while we are making reforms, other countries are doing reforms as well. And so we are ranked relative to other countries. Just as we want to improve our ranking, those countries want to improve their rankings, Mr. Speaker, and so we must continue with this whole process of reform. Mr. Speaker, on the fiscal front, I believe that there's a very broad and deep consensus in our country that the public finances must be repaired if we are to set a solid foundation for the attainment of our objectives of more buoyant growth and job creation. That is where it begins, Mr. Speaker. Sound public finances leads way to more money to direct to productive areas, Mr. Speaker. No need to raise taxes on the public if we are managing in a prudent manner. And, you know, all governments, successive administrations have looked at fiscal consolidation as an objective of their administration. And it was a prime objective of the previous administration throughout its 5-year mandate. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, they did not succeed. They failed miserably, actually, in matching their rhetoric with concrete improvements in the fiscal situation. For example, we all remember in the first budget, the previous administration asserted that their firm commitment to the so-called balanced budget fiscal policy that would produce a surplus on the recurrent account, and that as a result would begin the process of reducing the government debt to GDP. Admittedly, the public finances were gravely strained by the global financial crisis, but yet the government continued to stress in the 2009-2010 budget the vital need for fiscal discipline in order to return the public finances to more acceptable levels of public debt relative to the size of the economy. In their next budget, 2010-2011, they maintained the theme of fiscal redress, and that budget featured, in their words, the most significant structural fiscal action of any budget in recent years, with the overriding objective of enhancing the nation's economic prospects by putting its fiscal house in order on a sustained basis. And as we saw, all too painfully, Mr. Speaker, that fiscal action included sharp increases in taxes in a large number of areas, including stamp tax on real property conveyances, duties on cars and trucks, annual motor vehicle fees, and stamp tax on bank transactions, just to name a few. And in the event what did the bold words and fiscal actions of our predecessors accomplish in respect of fiscal consolidation? Mr. Speaker, the cold hard facts speak for themselves. When we left office in 2007, we left them with a debt to GDP ratio of 30%, generally acknowledged to be a desirable and sustainable level. 30%. When we returned to power in 2012, we inherited a dismal fiscal structure with a debt to GDP ratio that then stood at 55.4% of GDP in 2012-2013. Thus, Mr. Speaker, during the course of their 5-year mandate, they succeeded in producing the most astounding and explosive increase in the public debt burden in any 5-year period in the history of our nation. The burden of debt rose by fully 25.4% on their percentage points on their watch from the base of 30% that we had left them. Mr. Speaker, that is an astonishing 85% increase in the burden of government debt. To go from 30% to 55.4%, Mr. Speaker, an 85% increase, almost double. In marked contrast, Mr. Speaker, in our current mandate, the ratio of debt to GDP will be, by the end of this fiscal year, the 2016-2017 fiscal year, would have risen by a more modest 8.7 percentage points to a level of 64.1%. That's an increase of 15.7% over the course of our mandate, as compared to 85% during theirs. Mr. Speaker, moreover, the fiscal reforms that we have introduced and continue to implement under our medium-term fiscal plan will arrest the unrelenting rise in the government debt.
Members. Marathon and East Grand Bahama. Bring Marathon. Member for Golden Isle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, moreover, the fiscal reforms that we have introduced and continue to implement under our medium-term fiscal plan will arrest the unrelenting rise in the debt burden in the coming fiscal year, with the first actual decline in the burden of debt in many years. The ratio of debt to GDP, government debt to GDP, will continue to fall thereafter to stand at 59% in 2018-2019, well over 5 percentage points lower than the peak of 64.6% attained this year. That, Mr. Speaker, is the mark of true fiscal responsibility of a government that does what it says it will do and actually achieves the result that it promises. Increases or reductions in public debt, of course, Mr. Speaker, are a direct reflection of the annual balance between expenditure and revenue. It is by structurally reforming the balance between these major components of the public finances that we have been able to achieve our objective of putting the burden of debt on a downward path. As I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, we inherited, and I must remind the public, because like I said, we inherited a GFS deficit in 2012 of $539 million. When we finish this year, we would have that down to just under 100, Mr. Speaker. That structure resulted, as I said, in 2012-2013 GFS deficit of $539 million, or 6.4% of GDP. By all accounts, Mr. Speaker, not by most accounts, by all accounts, those are arguably the highest dollar and percentage levels of the deficit in the history of our nation since independence. The evolution of the fiscal structure on our watch has been such that we have posted smaller GFS deficits each and every year since our first year in office. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the 2016-2017 deficit at $100 million will be at its lowest level since the turn of the millennium, fully 16 years ago. And based on the available data, the small surplus in 2018-2019 that we are projecting will be the first such surplus in at least the last 40 years, if not since independence. Mr. Speaker, right there. Mr. Speaker, in our balanced and measured approach to fiscal consolidation, we are targeting a gradual reduction in the weight of recurrent expenditure relative to the size of the economy, and we are aiming to keep capital expenditure constant in the area of 2.5% of GDP, Mr. Speaker. And that is what I was talking about when I say sometimes people look at purely the number and say, oh, the number is going up. But you have to look at the number in terms of the size of the economy. In 2016-2017, the total of our spending would be, the total of recurrent and capital spending will be at about 27, just under 28% of the GDP. And when we compare us to other countries in the region, Mr. Speaker, where, for example, we're looking at 30%, and in places such as Trinidad and Tobago, and 40%, 44% in countries such as Barbados, Mr. Speaker. And we have stated as our objective of reducing recurrent expenditure as a share of GDP by 1 percentage point or more going forward, Mr. Speaker. So even though the absolute number might rise, you might look at it and say, oh, the spending has risen. But with the economy growing, we want to keep it at and actually reduce it as a share, as a percentage of the GDP, Mr. Speaker. And, all the data is there, Mr. Speaker. And on the basis of these data, I would dare say, Mr. Speaker, no one can say, they can say it, but no one can credibly say, Mr. Speaker, that recklessness in spending is a characteristic of this government, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that we remain committed to further enhancing the effectiveness of all our government programs and services, Mr. Speaker. There's always more work to be done. And so while, we reflect on how far we've come, we recognize that, there's much, much more to be done. Our resources are scarce, and we need to manage them so that we can be able to even more efficiently allocate them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to move along and speak about, because I don't want to take up the entire 2 hours, Mr. Speaker. I know members are eager to speak. Need me to take up the, okay, no problem. No, I have loads to say. Loads to say, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, all right. Mr. Speaker, there is a debate that goes on, and I think it's like, I call it those bumper sticker debates, you know, where you can explain and you can give information, you can provide the facts, and they just come back and ask the same question, Mr. Speaker, because it's one of those, I call it a slogan, like it's a bumper sticker slogan that you can put on a bumper sticker, where the VAT money gone? All right, so we come here and we present information upon information. We stay here all night, going through each individual line of the budget, put the stuff online, but, you know, we come right back with it, you know? There it is. We have it here, and I'm sure we'll be able to go through it again. This will be like this will be like the third budget we're going through since then. So, you know, we'll have a good time, Mr. Speaker. But, and then there's this question, people say, well, Alcides, I thought you say VAT money going to pay down the debt. And I said, well, yes, it does, because, you know, it doesn't go directly on there, because it's not that you have a separate pot that goes to do that, but it trickles through, you know, by improving your revenue, you run a lower deficit, and so you don't have to borrow as much every year, and we're seeing it playing out now, where we're actually, Mr. Speaker, we're going to be borrowing $100 million. We have a borrowing resolution for $100 million, and we're actually repaying $287 million. This will be debt redemption this year, debt that's being paid off, $287 million. So we're actually paying off more than we're adding to this year. But we'll talk. We'll have a lot of time to talk about that. But sometimes, I guess, Mr. Speaker, the temptation is, you know, you keep throwing the question, and then when you go into an explanation, you say, well, I don't understand you, or you know, you're not giving me all the information. But I think I'll spend some time just going through what has been the impact on the finances of the reforms that we have undergone, Mr. Speaker. I think that would give us a better understanding of how the various reform and modernization exercises are bearing fruit. As was explained by the Prime Minister in the communication, the overall goal of tax reform has been to secure an appreciable and necessary increase in the revenue yield of our tax system in support of both modern governance and the sustainability of our public finances. The evidence is clear that our tax reform plan has been highly successful in attaining that objective. From the low revenue yield of 16.3% of GDP that we inherited in 2012, the yield has risen to an estimated 22% of GDP in the current fiscal year. Now, lest someone say, okay, well, you're just doing it, loading up taxes on the back of the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, I'll go through how it works. With the ongoing reform exercise in respect of our major taxes and the further maturation of the VAT system, the revenue yield, so as we go on, revenue yield is expected to rise further to the area of 23.7% of GDP in the coming fiscal year. However, it is very important to stress again that while this is a significant increase in the yield to a more appreciable level, our revenue yield still remains relatively low in comparison to those found elsewhere in the region, Mr. Speaker. And so we were collecting 16% of GDP in government revenue, whereas in other countries around, so that is what we had to work with to pay all the bills, pay all the people, pay the rents, the interest, everything. Countries around the region, Mr. Speaker, they're working with about 30%. So even if we have 16, they have 30, Mr. Speaker. And so we were at a distinct disadvantage. So even with the reforms that we have put in, we expect to be in the region of just under 24% this year, a nice improvement, but again, we're still constrained with what we have, Mr. Speaker. It is very instructive, Mr. Speaker, to look at the various reforms in the revenue, in the various areas of our revenue, to see what their results have been and how they have contributed to where we are today, Mr. Speaker. So we're looking at going from 16.3% revenue yield when we came in, Mr. Speaker, to 23.7 at the end of this year, an increase of approximately 7.4%. And the most significant factor in that enhancement, Mr. Speaker, was the VAT that we introduced in 2015, and that has contributed a full 7 percentage points of GDP to the aggregate revenue yield. However, with the implementation of VAT, Mr. Speaker, we also announced cuts to import duties and stamp taxes on real property transactions, as well as the elimination of the hotel occupancy tax. Those measures, Mr. Speaker, contributed respectively reductions of 0.3, 0.5, and a full 1 percentage point of GDP to the revenue yield, Mr. Speaker. So as we brought in VAT, we got an improvement with that, but we eliminated some things, and so we lost some money. But in contrast, Mr. Speaker, because we implemented the VAT, we had positive improvements in the following areas. Business license up by 0.7%, real property tax up, gaming tax, excise tax, other non-tax revenue, motor vehicle fees, and bank and trust company fees, Mr. Speaker. And so while VAT has been the major component, we see that because of that reform, we had some things drop off, but we had improvement in other areas, Mr. Speaker. So it's all working together, and that is the advice that we had even before implementation, is that if you do this reform, you would have improvements in all the other areas of your revenue, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, to comment on the issue of the extent to which the new VAT proceeds have contributed to the improvement in the public finances. There seems to be some misapprehension or misunderstanding or deliberate misinformation, Mr. Speaker, in the public domain, to the effect that the proceeds may have been utilized solely to finance increased government spending rather than contributing to improvement in our fiscal position. That's the accusation. Okay, you got this VAT money, you're just spending it instead of it going to reduction in debt, Mr. Speaker. In order to provide the proper perspective, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to get too esoteric, but it's important to note that movements in debt to GDP are driven solely by the primary fiscal balance on the one hand, and the difference between interest rates and the growth in the economy on the other, Mr. Speaker. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, if you have a positive, the primary balance is the difference between your deficit excluding interest payments. If you can run a primary surplus, Mr. Speaker, i.e., you're running your government and you're not borrowing money to pay interest, then you're on the right path to begin to reduce your debt, Mr. Speaker. And what we have seen is that, and we are forecasting that we will have a primary surplus. We will realize one this year that we're completing, and the year that we're going into, Mr. Speaker. If you can run a primary surplus, meaning you don't have to borrow money to pay interest, that is the way that you will begin to reduce your debt burden, and we will realize a primary surplus in this year as well as next year, Mr. Speaker, and we forecast continued primary surpluses as we move forward. There was an extensive report, Mr. Speaker, by one of the rating agencies indicating how important it was. It was about a year ago, how important it was for us to maintain and to run primary surpluses if we wanted to begin to see our debt reduced, Mr. Speaker. And as I have said, we are beginning to see the turnaround. So it's not as simple as take the VAT money and pay off the debt. It goes through the system, Mr. Speaker, but at the end of the day, the same thing happens. You begin to see your debt reduced. And I hope that answers some of the question, but I'm always available to answer it again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the budget communication, the Minister of Finance announced the broad outline of the mortgage relief plan that we want to pursue. And I just want to give a few further details on the parameters and on the operation of the plan that we intend to implement. Mr. Speaker, to be eligible for the plan, the borrowers must meet the following criteria. The mortgage is 90 plus days past due as of May 1st, 2016. The property must be located in the Bahamas and must be owner-occupied up to a duplex. The current outstanding mortgage balance should not exceed $500,000, and the borrower's current total debt servicing ratio is less than 75%. The borrower must agree to full disclosure. They must agree to restrictions on incurring any further personal debt and commits to allowing no other salary deduction other than those in place at the time of restructuring. The borrower must successfully complete a 6-month trial period where successful completion is defined as no more than one period greater than 30 days past due in that 6 months. And the borrower agrees to participate in free financial counseling with 3 in-person meetings during that trial period. Our intention, Mr. Speaker, is for borrowers with a current total debt servicing ratio below 45%. The banks must reduce their monthly payment by at least 20%. For borrowers with current ratios above 45%, banks must reduce their monthly payment by 25%. And to achieve the borrower's targeted monthly payment reduction, participating banks must apply the following stated order of successive steps. They can capitalize accrued interest and/or arrears, but no capitalization of late fees. They must extend the loan term in accordance with central bank guidance, reduce the interest rate to the average market rate, forbear some principal interest-free with the amount to be paid upon a future sale of property. And, Mr. Speaker, if a bank believes that a mortgage can be restructured outside the parameters of this program as defined above, it is welcome to do so. The application window will be restricted to 6 months from the program announcement, and the program will be effective for 3 years, Mr. Speaker. The participating banks will be required to make initial contact with each potential eligible borrower within 3 months of launch. Once approved for participation in the program, the borrower will be required to sign an agreement reflecting their mortgage relief plan obligations and any consequences of a breach, Mr. Speaker. Banks will be required to provide data to the central bank on loan resolution results and borrower outcomes for the duration of the program, and reporting will be required on a monthly basis for the first year of the program and on a quarterly basis in years 2 and 3. Any legal action underway by banks will be stayed for participating borrowers, Mr. Speaker. The borrowers with current total debt services above 45% will be required to participate in free financial counseling, and the government will define the program framework and requirements, design the program curriculum, create and distribute program content material, fund the program for an initial period of 1 year with an extension to be determined. We will recruit financial counselors to provide space, and we will provide the space, Mr. Speaker. So we want people to undergo financial counseling so that at the end, if some relief is brought to bear, they don't find themselves a few months down the line back in the same situation, Mr. Speaker. And I should say at this point that the legislation for the credit bureau, Mr. Speaker, is just it's in the final stages of preparation, and we expect our timetable is for that to be able to come to this House before the end of this calendar year, Mr. Speaker, again, which will assist all lenders and borrowers, Mr. Speaker, to provide them with information so that we can begin to combat this whole issue of over leverage and people being so much in debt that they can't service it, Mr. Speaker. And we've seen the the serious consequences of it over the past few years, Mr. Speaker. Financial advisors will conduct a comprehensive one-on-one interview with the borrower and provide an assessment of the borrower's overall financial situation, hardship, or other issues that resulted in difficulty. They will help them to develop a budget. There will be follow-up sessions, Mr. Speaker, and the financial advisors will track the progress of the participants, Mr. Speaker. And so we're trying to develop an holistic approach, Mr. Speaker. As you know, we've had many tries at this, and one of the main problems that we found is the over-leverage, particularly in the area of consumer credit, Mr. Speaker, that when it was fully revealed, it led to the lack of success of the previous program. And so we are trying to put together a more comprehensive program, Mr. Speaker, that big emphasis on consumer education. Mr. Speaker, as we now move to this debate, I think it's very important to stress that this is an administration of action and results, Mr. Speaker. We, on the fiscal front, and I'm sure members as they contribute to this debate will speak about what they met and the strides that they have had to take and the results that they have seen, Mr. Speaker. This is the final. I may not get a chance to speak again in this debate substantively. I might get up to answer a question, and when we get to the committee stage, Mr. Speaker, I might have an opportunity to shed some light on other issues that might arise. But this represents, in effect, a report card, Mr. Speaker, of how we have managed the financial resources of the country over the past, so far, 4.5 years, and going into, at the end of it, will be a 5-year term, Mr. Speaker. And I think, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of work to be done. We have to continue to make strides in terms of management, in terms of making sure that we have in place and we continue to review mechanisms, policy, standards, practices, to ensure that we do not have these situations where we are faced with reports that show lack of adherence to procedures, Mr. Speaker. So we have to continue to improve that. That is going to be at the conclusion, when we have done with this debate, we turn our attention at the Ministry of Finance fully to the public financial management program and rolling that out, Mr. Speaker, which includes an investment in statistics, improvement in public procurement, Mr. Speaker, moving towards a centralization so we can have better control, improved IT, Mr. Speaker. So I want to say there's a lot of work to be done. You know our job is not finished, and I'm sure during the course of the debate, the opposition will point out to us where there needs to be more. But recognizing that, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for us to once again say to the Bahamian people that when we came into power, we inherited a tremendously difficult financial position. Lack of resources, commitments to pay, commitments that continue to accrue, Mr. Speaker. But I believe that if one were to look at it objectively, look at where we started, look at the decisions that we've had to make, look at the way in which we've implemented those decisions, Mr. Speaker, and look at the results. Look at the fact that we've been able to improve our finances, we've been able to settle industrial agreements, we've been able to have investment in our national security, both in terms of material and personnel, increase scholarships available to Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, increase and provide doctors in islands that have never had a doctor stationed there, Mr. Speaker, undergo the various infrastructural developments that we're doing, all within a very, very challenging environment in terms of growth, Mr. Speaker. I think any objective observer would say that we have done, if not a commendable, at least a good job, Mr. Speaker. And I have attempted to show today for the benefit of honorable members, but more importantly because we work for the Bahamian people. So I wanted, more importantly, to show our Bahamian citizens that we are effectively following up. We're doing the things we said we would do in terms of reducing customs duties, reducing other taxes as we gain more experience with VAT. And so we are effectively following up on both our agenda of change for modern Bahamas and our medium-term fiscal consolidation plan, Mr. Speaker. They go hand in hand. We need better finances so that we can modernize our country for the betterment of our citizens, Mr. Speaker. And I am confident that we can all look forward to a brighter future. And so with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I move for second reading and committal of the Appropriations Bill 2016-2017.
Thank you, honorable member. Do we have a seconder? Chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to second this 2016-2017 appropriation of funds in form of the budget resolution. And as presented by the right honorable member for Centerville and the honorable member for Golden Isles. Mr. Speaker, I do so with a spirit of humility and a heart of gratitude, firstly recognizing the wonderful opportunity the eternal God has given me or afforded me to represent the people of North Abaco, and by extension, our beloved country, the Bahamas. Speaker, before I speak to the budget communication, I would like to extend my condolences to the Roll family on the passing of a great community leader, a supporter of the Progressive Liberal Party. He was the stalwart councillor who was one who was upright in the community, certainly one that had gained the respect of all of his peers from the community of Crown Haven, one of the far communities in the north. He passed away about 2 weeks ago at the age of 90 plus. Very strong man, strong personality, of course, but everybody knows Mr. Nathan Rowe. But he was one that was highly respected, and I just wanted to give my condolences to his family and say to them as they go through this time of mourning, we pray that God would keep them and sustain them. Speaker, the Prime Minister's communication solidifies the exemplary work the government of the Bahamas continues to carry out on behalf of the Bahamian people. I want to commend the Right Honorable Member for Centerville and the Member for Golden Isles, along with the supporting staff at the Ministry of Finance, for introducing such a detailed and responsible budget. Certainly, this budget communication speaks to a bright future for the Bahamas, regardless of some of the financial challenges we face in our country. The government remains optimistic and sympathetic to the fact that the Bahamas is not immune to world conditions, economic conditions. I believe its deliberation, Mr. Speaker, was honest and calculated, giving clear vision and direction as to the way forward for a prosperous Bahamas. Speaker, when we talk about world conditions, we think about the country called China and the slowdown in their economy. We think about how even though they see a slowdown in economic activities, China is still doing a number of projects here in the Bahamas. I think about the project they're doing now in the North Abaco area, the port. They're doing investments in the point here in Nassau and having some as far as inside with the Bahama project. But I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, the fact is that they are still doing some investments here. One of the things I would like to see, is to see more Bahamians involved in these projects, not only in the development stages, but also in the completion stages. It would be nice to have Bahamians, more of the percentage of Bahamians involved. I look at the project again in North Abaco, and that we're hoping that we see even more involvement during the development stages of that project. Bahamians, Port, North Abaco Port. Mr. Speaker, as highlighted by the Honorable Member for Golden Isles, the government's commitment to its medium-term fiscal consolidated plans remains intact. It is aligned to promote its core principles, which are to restrain the growth of public expenditures while seeking to increase revenue streams to a more desirable levels of over 20% of GDP. And to do so, we have modernized our revenue administration. We have seen the implications which resulted in a more improved and efficient collection of government revenues. In addition, we are securing new sources of revenue as seen through the introduction and the successful application of the value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, we are confident the enactment of our fiscal consolidated plan, as mentioned, will lead to a more sustainable growth of our national economy. And you would have heard the member spoke specifically about the government restructuring using a public financial management system where we can certainly, Mr. Speaker, properly manage public accounts. This is the government is seeking to, as people talk about even the management of VAT, the collection of VAT, this government is seeking to ensure that people's funds are properly allocated and spent. Mr. Speaker, it is important that in our analysis of the financial status of our country, we measure its success or failure by previous indicators. I believe this is the only way one can truly appreciate the accomplishments of our government. When we consider the extremely high deficit we inherited when coming to office in 2012, which yielded a GFS of some 539 million, and to see where we are today, having a GFS deficit of some 150 million, enjoying a two-third reduction of over $300 million. This success, Mr. Speaker, should not be understated. And when we talk about the government heading in the right direction, Speaker, I believe it is safe to say that we are heading in the right direction as it relates to dealing specifically with our high deficit that we inherited when coming to office. Mr. Speaker, to protect our economy, the government had to exercise dire fiscal restraints, as you've heard. In the face of a rising national debt, mainly due to high debt servicing requirements, along with a number of ongoing contractual obligations from the previous administration, this government, Mr. Speaker, had to make tough decisions, especially as it relates to capital expenditures in an attempt to reduce these capital outflows to 3% of GDP, which is relevant to the size of our economy. It takes a disciplined government to hold to its overall fiscal plan, especially around the time of general election, and the temptations are even greater. Mr. Speaker, if we go back and we think about the 2012 general election, we remember the millions of dollars being spent on the eve of a general election. We remember, Mr. Speaker, we'll remember that letters were being dropped off to persons as they were worshiping church. Remember letters coming on a weekend when public servants should be actually off. But this was happening. I was actually a candidate running, so I should know. Don't ask me what I should know, but I would know. Mr. Speaker, I say that because the temptations become so great when you talk about discipline, government without discipline. You look at the previous administration and they were caught up in the moment. A desperation had set in. They wanted to win, and so they did whatever it took. Mr. Speaker, you must remember that in the case of doing that, sometimes you can plunge your national economy underwater, so to say, Mr. Speaker. And this government, as we have always done, has always had to regroup and save the economy, Mr. Speaker. So we, as it is, this government is a government of good management, headed by the right honorable member for Centerville. And whether the Bahamian people realize it or not, Mr. Speaker, we are here to ensure that the economy stays afloat. Mr. Speaker, national debts are created by long-term deficits, as we heard the honorable member for Golden Isles mentioned, which come about through successive governments' continued borrowing. We are seeking to eliminate the deficit to borrow less, to primarily borrow for capital projects only. And so, Mr. Speaker, national debts come about. It doesn't just come overnight. It's a long-term process, Speaker, as we all know, those financial minds. And most of this debt, when you look at the debt that we now have, it had to derive from someplace. So you have to go back, Mr. Speaker, to see exactly how this debt came about. And so a lot of times we hear the opposition use the words, well, high national debt, which is so. But as the member would have stated, we saw the continued borrowings of money, in some cases to pay public servants. Okay, you're borrowing money every month just to pay the public servants' salaries, Mr. Speaker. And you're borrowing money to pay interest. In a case like this, you have a situation where that deficit continues to build, Mr. Speaker, and the national debt as a result continue to climb. But you heard that the right honorable member for Centerville would have stated in his communication that we have gotten to a point where we would have arrested that national debt, and now we're looking to have in the very near future a surplus in the deficit, and so we can look at now the national debt beginning to decline or beginning to decrease. Very easy, coming down, Mr. Speaker. And so we're looking forward to that national debt to come down. And we're seeking to make sure it comes down, Mr. Speaker, by good managing strategies, unlike the previous administration. Mr. Speaker, our discipline to maintain good economic conditions in the Bahamas protects the Bahamian dollar that is pegged to the US dollar, which is universal currency. This relationship that exists through a reserve arrangement at the central bank has proven beneficial as it relates to the Bahamian dollar buying power. I often think, Mr. Speaker, because most Bahamians, I believe, don't think about the need for the government to maintain a good economic environment condition, as far as they're just thinking about, especially those who doesn't have that financial mind. They're just thinking, how do I make it from day to day? But I often think, Mr. Speaker, about the devaluation of the Bahamian dollar. I think about so many of our people who the fact that they love the United States of America, and they can travel there with $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, whatever it is. But the buying power of that $1,000 remains the same as they go to the U.S. If we have a devaluation, Mr. Speaker, of our Bahamian dollar, of course that buying power is diminished. And so there's an importance when you look at keeping now good economic conditions for the country to maintain that good dollar-to-dollar power with the United States. Speaker, I want to just make a statement concerning our Bahamian people. there are a lot of Bahamians who are struggling today financially. A lot of Bahamians, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency, it's so many of them. Sometimes it is overwhelming just hearing the stories and the hardships that they are experiencing. And I believe much of this has to do with underemployment in some cases, because we've heard the stories about two husband and both wife working, but yet they're still not able to pay the bills as far as mortgage, light, Speaker. So this is a situation, I believe, that even though this government has sought to raise the minimum wage, we still are in a society where the cost of living is extremely high for our people. And I would urge us to continue to look for ways in which we can assist in bringing the cost of living down. I know we talk about BEC being a second, almost a second mortgage payment by a lot of families. And the government, again, has sought to try to bring down that cost. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, when you think about it, the alternative energy costs, even though it's pretty expensive to install, these are different ways that we must look at and how we can help our people. Maybe paying for that installation itself, but it's a serious situation that is becoming overwhelming for a lot of my people in the constituency that I represent, and that I would hope that we figure out a way to help so many of our Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker.
The member yields. Chair recognizes the member for Bain and Grandstown.
Mr. Speaker, I think this would be an appropriate time for us to take the suspension. So I move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
All right.
Ferguson. Janea? Renato Curry, the North Abaco MP, who was seconding Michael Halkitis, the Golden Isles MP and Minister of State for Finance. And Mr. Halkitis, amongst other things, in leading off the debate on the budget, highlighted the need for the Bahamas to improve the ease of doing business here. As you may remember, the Bahamas was ranked 106 out of 189 countries when it came to the ease of doing business. Not a very good position to be in. So he pointed out several points that are going to be made to improve the way we do business in the Bahamas so that we can move up that ranking. Well, let's now go back to the House of Assembly and Janea Noel Ferguson. Janea?
Thanks so much, Julian. We are live here at the House of Assembly. Budget on the 2016-2017 debate just got underway, leading off by Minister of State for Finance, Mr. Michael Halkitis. But before that, we had a communication by Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christie, who addressed yesterday's results from the gender equality referendum. The Prime Minister noting that the results the voice of the people were clear. He described the process as fair and transparent, and he indicated that the voice of the people will be honored, as is the case with a constitutional referendum. I have joined with me members of the Constitutional Commission who for the past 2 to 3 years have worked tirelessly throughout the family of islands, educating people on the impact of those 4 bills. However, as you know, those bills were rejected yesterday by the Bahamian people. Chairman of the Constitutional Commission, Mr. Paul McQueenie, and Sean McQueenie and Brandis Duncanson, who is also one of the executive members who is on the ground through all of this. Now that you see what has happened as a result of yesterday's vote, what can you tell us initially, your initial thoughts of what happened or what might have went wrong?
Well, I think it was a number of factors at work. I think one, there's no question that, particularly towards the latter part of the pre-referendum the public discourse, that there was a lot of contamination of the public discourse by fear, in some cases a little bit of hysteria. There was a lot of suspicion, a lot of distrust, a lot of talk about hidden agendas. And I think at the end of the day, what may initially have been a concern just about Bill 4 and Bill 2, I think just reached a point where people said, screw this, man, we're going to vote against all four. And clearly the Bahamian people did so in overwhelming numbers. So I think that the good thing about the result is that it's very clear. There's no question about what the Bahamian people were saying. They want no part of any of these bills. There's nothing in doubt about that. And I think it means that the government, in concert with the opposition, will have to do a complete rethink of the constitutional program for change and decide if and how and when they will proceed again. But my own view is it'll be quite a while before you have another referendum or have other constitutional bills coming forward.
Listening to the Prime Minister, he talked about this process, as you said, not knowing how or when we can bring these questions back to the Bahamian people. And the Constitution Commission presented a number of recommendations about 73
Right.
about what needed to be changed. And there was also some concern that there were some issues that could have been more pressing than the gender equality that Bahamians were calling for.
Well, this was not, these were not the subjects that we picked. The government and the opposition decided that this first round of constitutional reform would be limited to gender equality. Actually, it was the opposition's idea. The government wanted to have a bipartisan effort, and the opposition made it clear that they would only make it a bipartisan effort if the first round would be limited strictly to gender equality issues. And that was understandable because the FNM saw that as unfinished business from 2002, when they had brought a gender equality referendum and it had failed. So the government said, okay, fine, we'll go with that. Left to the commission, we would have introduced some other things as well.
Can you give us an indication of what you felt would have been more pressing?
Well, I'm not saying they were more pressing, because I don't think there's anything more pressing than saying that men and women are equal, right? I think that clearly was a number one subject. But we thought that if you're going to have a referendum, include some of the other areas which we had targeted as priority areas. One of them would have been having an independent director of public prosecutions, so the Attorney General's powers of criminal prosecution would be taken away from her and given to someone who is truly independent. Another one, which is about to become very topical, is that we thought that now is the time to move towards having an independent, autonomous boundaries commission to take it out of the hands of politicians and have this whole issue of redistricting and control of the conduct of elections placed in the hands of an autonomous body. We suspected that there would have been resistance to that from both the government and opposition, but we thought that that was another area of priority attention. Increasing the age of retirement of judges, that was another area, obviously less of a priority, but we thought that that could have been conveniently added to the agenda for this first round.
So questions that we have seen before.
Yes, but the government and opposition decided they wanted to just go with gender equality, and that's why we were limited to that.
Okay, Ms. Duncanson, you've been on the ground. You've talked to just about every sector of the Bahamian society through all of this. Your initial feelings, I know that there were some tears earlier, and now that you've seen what happened and how those results played out.
Yes, I mean, I am disappointed in the outcome. While I really didn't expect all bills to pass, I did expect some to get a majority yes vote. But at the end of the day, the Bahamian people have spoken. They've made it loud and clear exactly how they feel about this particular issue of equal rights and basic fairness. And that is a decision that I myself have to respect and move forward.
At this point, is the work of the commission over? Are we going back to those recommendations? Are we going to put another set of questions before the Bahamian people? What is in your hands now?
Well, I think that's entirely a matter for the political directorate. As I said, we don't decide what issues are coming forward to be put in legislative form. We don't decide on any of those things. That's a matter for the government in combination with the opposition. So right now, I think the commission has done its work, and it's probably going to have to just wait and see what happens next.
I just wanted you to comment a little bit about how it got, or how you felt to the end of all of this. The last month, the last 2 months leading up to this, there were a lot of voices, a lot of strong voices against what the commission was saying, the changes that were needed.
During the last, let's say, 2 to 3 months, the conversation, the discussions did move away from the issue at hand, which was basic fairness and equal rights. And at some point, it did feel as if the whole premise of these bills were getting lost in other issues and being taken away due to other frustrations that Bahamians have with the government and with other issues that they felt. However, maybe it was just my young naivety. I felt that at the end of the day, Bahamians would have been able to see the issues for exactly what they were, what they stood for, and vote accordingly, and maybe leave the political issues, frustrations for 2017. Perhaps everything got emotional and got convoluted, and who knows?
That's the idealism and innocence of youth, you know.
In your view, final question, in your view, both of you, the final view, do you think it was politics or the fear of same-sex marriage and this whole transgender debate that ensued during the last few weeks?
All of the above. All of the above, I have to say. I think it was a mix of religious fears, homophobia, xenophobia, I think all coming together. I think contributed greatly to what we saw yesterday.
I agree with that entirely. I think that there's no question that there were many different factors at work here, and unfortunately they all came together and worked very negatively to produce the result. But as I said, at the same time, I think it is another glorious expression of Bahamian democracy. You had full, free and fair elections. The people got an opportunity to express their view. We always said at the end of the day, the nature of this whole referendum process is such that it's the Bahamian people deciding if they want their things, their constitution changed. And it belongs to them, belongs to the Bahamian people. So it's fair and proper that they should have the final say. And they had the final say yesterday, and they said no. And we have to respect that.
Thank you so much, Chairman of the Constitution Commission, Sean McQueenie, and Brandis Duncanson, who is the executive member on the Constitution Commission, sharing their views, their feedback, reaction on what took place yesterday. It's a story that will be in the headlines, I'm sure, for the next few days. But debate on the budget continues this afternoon at 3 p.m. The member for North Abaco, Renato Curry, continues his contribution. You can tune into live proceedings of the House of Assembly right here on Parliamentary Channel 40. Live from Parliament, I'm Janae Noel Ferguson. Back to you in the studio, Julian.
Thank you, Janaea. And as she said, we will be back at 3 p.m. Until then, I'm Julian Reed.